We are in the book of Acts. Please grab your Bibles. We're going to continue in Acts chapter 23. Acts chapter 23. If you don't have a Bible, we have a lot of Bibles in the back underneath our offering box by the door, kind of there. Please grab one, follow along. We've been talking about Paul's we've kind of hit a point in Acts now where it's going to start to seem to go really kind of fast. Paul's going to have all these trials. He's going to go through all these meetings. He's going to go through all these defenses of his story. And that's really the next few chapters. Paul gets passed from person to person to person. And we've been talking about how do you even prepare yourself for these type of situations? How do you even... I can't even imagine how to put yourself in a situation because you can't really prepare for every situation. You just can't do that. I know we all want to be Boy Scouts and be always prepared. But we talked last week, that's how we prepare for major decisions now by the thousands of little decisions that led up to this point. And so we want to continue that and kind of talk a little bit about how do we practically actually do this day to day. Because I know I need to do this and I want to do this, but how do I actually do this? Because life is full. When was the last time you talked to someone and you're like, how's life? And my standard answer for a long time was busy. And you know what most people said? Me too. I don't think I've talked to a person. I cannot remember the last time I talked to a person where I said, how's life? And they said, it's kind of slow and boring. And I think the last time someone said that, I was so jealous because that's what I wanted. Life, I just wanted life to slow down. It feels like it's out of my control. So how on earth do I train to be more Christ-like in a world where I can't even seem to control my own life, where I have control of my life, per se? So, here's what I want you to imagine with me. Okay, imagine a room full of people, not like this one. Like you go to an event and there's all sorts of socialization going on and there's people all over and you're kind of bouncing around. And many of you, if you're like me, you're already feeling a little anxious because it's a large group of people and I have to interact with people, and that's not something it's not always, but it's just kind of busy, it's full. And we're going around from person to person. You got to think through those social interactions. It takes energy to think that way, right? Because what are we doing? We're doing things that we ought to be doing. Well, I ought to go talk to so-and-so. I ought to go talk to that person. I ought to go do this thing and interact that way and say this thing. And you know what? The people take energy, but what really exhausts me is the oughtness of life. I ought to do this and I ought to do that. And it's sitting here and it's like, I feel like all my life is only what I ought to do. Okay? So now imagine that same group of people, that same interaction, but change the people from adults to elementary kids. What does your feeling shift? Maybe your feeling doesn't shift. God bless you, you're probably an elementary school teacher. But if you're not, and you're like me, I'm already it's a different type of overwhelming. It's a different type of overwhelming because there's more joy and there's more energy. But man, am I overwhelmed in a different type of sense because it seems like everyone now, if you think of how kids interact with people, it's always about a lot of things at the same time. And so you're just trying to prioritize, wait. It's not about what I ought to do. It's also about how do I, and what, and wait, okay, this person first. You know what I'm saying? You kind of get what I'm getting at? And the person who we always seem to prioritize first, and this is just more than kids too, is the loudest person, right? It's the loudest thing that's screaming in our life. And this is exactly what both those things, if you mash them together, this is what I feel like life is like sometimes. I'm always trying to do things that I'm supposed to be doing, which is exhausting, and I'm doing it in an area that's exhausting in itself, and I'm doing it with people who are all trying to vie for my attention at the same time, and I'm forced out of necessity just to take a step forward to focus on what is the loudest thing in my life at the moment. And unfortunately, that is not often growing in my Christian walk. It is an important thing, but it's not the thing that's screaming at me the loudest. It becomes the thing that screams at me the loudest when something happens. Something happens. And we don't want to get in that situation. No one wants to get in that situation. where I have to grow because if I don't grow, I'm going to suffer. We all want to be consistent. We all want to be every day. We all want to walk. But how do we actually do that? And I think sometimes it's how we view Christianity. We view it as another thing that we're supposed to do. Another choice that I have to make. Another thing that I have to give attention to. And you come to church and you hear Joel and John and we're saying you have to make Christianity more important. And you're hearing, Christianity can't be louder because this thing in my life is already screaming at me. How am I supposed to make Christianity louder than this? I don't want you to view it that way. I don't want you to, because that's not what Paul viewed it that way. Remember, Paul viewed it as this is the thing that gives me peace. This is the thing that I run to that brings me security. This is the thing that it's the waves of the ocean that crash me onto the sweet rock that is Jesus. That's Spurgeon. I have come to love the waves that push me onto the rock that is Christ. It's not that I am vying for more attention. Jesus doesn't want to just have part of your attention. He wants to be the foundation that secures your entire life. He wants to be the person that gives you an identity that's solid. He wants to be the unchangeable force in our very overwhelming lives. He will not change. It is not in His nature to change. It is not in His nature to be different. This is the God of the universe who created things. He doesn't move. He doesn't shift. And He's a God that is for us, not against us. This is not another thing that screams in our life. It's a thing that brings us peace and silence. But that's hard to do. So that's what I kind of want to talk about, because we're going to dive into more talking and letters and travel. But at the midst of all of this, how do we continually go back to our foundation? Continually run back to this again and again and again, because that's what we do. So, Acts 23, verse 23. Then he called to the centurions and said, now this is the tribune, okay? So what has happened is Paul has been found that this is beyond the local level of Roman government. We need to move him on to something bigger. He's a Roman citizen. This is a little bit too big for our hands. He's already kind of gotten into some trouble because we've already arrested him. We've bound him. We may have beat him, but we're not supposed to say that because that's not good, because we get in really big trouble because he's a Roman citizen. So they called to the centurions and said, get ready, 200 soldiers and 70 horsemen and 200 spearmen to go as far as Caesarea at the 3rd hour of the night. So early in the morning, these Roman tribune have figured out that this is way, way too big for us. So this is Paul, who was just beaten by a mob not that long ago, and the Romans, like the police officers of the day, the Roman centurions came in and broke it up and brought him in, and they were going to beat him themselves. This is a guy that they didn't know anything about 12 hours ago, maybe 24 hours ago. And all of a sudden, now he has 470 guards escorting him 35 miles to Caesarea. That is a large jump in priority to these people. A large jump in priority to these people. Paul is, I gotta feel like kind of being just pushed down by the current, just kind of riding it out, because he's on this crazy, because he was beat by the Jews, to be saved by the Romans, to be beat by the Romans, to be saved by another type of Roman, to be escorted by the Romans to another type of Roman. So it's going back and forth and back and forth. And so he has all of these guards, which, by the way, is like half of the available unit at that time. So this is a very sizable chunk just to guard Paul, because there's people, 40 people, who are literally vowed to try to kill him. So this is a big deal. And this is a Roman citizen, so they have to kind of go above and beyond to get him to this place. But there is a ulterior motive going on. So they said, also provide mounts, plural, for Paul, to ride and bring him safely to Felix, the governor of Judea, the guy who's in charge of this. He's been around this area governing this for 6, 7, 8 years. And he does not have a good reputation of being nice to the Jewish people, which is ironic because he's the governor of the Jewish people. But multiple mounts, they're going to ride through the night, early morning, to get Paul to Felix right away, because the sense of danger for Paul is, at an all-time high. It has escalated. And so here's what they write a letter, and they sent it off with them to Felix, the governor. So this is a public letter because we have record of it. So Luke went in and got it. So this is an official letter. Now I want you to notice how he has twisted all of the things around. This is from the Tribune. Claudius Lysias to His Excellency the Governor Felix, greetings. This man was seized by the Jews and was about to be killed by them when I came upon them with soldiers and rescued him. Nope, that's not what happened. He was being beaten and they're like, should we save this guy? Well, let's beat him and see what he says. Okay, that's not quite true. Having learned that he was a Roman citizen. They didn't learn that until after they bound him and beat him. And desiring to know the charge for which they were accused, I brought him down to their council. Council, also known as straps and whips. I found that he was being accused about questions of their law, but charged with nothing deserving of death or imprisonment. And when it was disclosed to me that there would be a plot against the man, I sent him to you at once, ordering his accusers also to state before you what they have against him. So they're moving this beyond them. They didn't move him on at once. Once they figured out this was a big mess, like, you know what, someone else can deal with him. I do not want to deal. We're going to send him to Felix because this is beyond us, and we're just going to make people mad. We're just going to make people mad. So the soldiers, according to their instruction, took Paul and brought him by night to Antipatris. So it's by Caesarea. And on the next day they returned to the barracks, letting the horsemen go on with him. So they only had the armed foot soldiers for half the way. And then the next day they had all the mounted soldiers with them as well. But there's still a significant number of people on a dangerous road. This is a large group of 75-ish people going down the road on a horse. This is a very noticeable event. This is not a typical, this is like what you get for Roman officials, Roman politicians type of thing. And when they had come to Caesarea, they delivered the letter to the governor. They presented Paul also before him, and on reading the letter, he asked what province he was from. And when he learned that he was from Cilicia, and he said, I will give you a hearing when your accusers arrive. And he commanded him to be guarded in Herod's praetorium. So a lot has gone on. So Paul is delivered here. Paul has done and said nothing, by the way, and there's hardly anything. We have nothing recorded of Paul. He's just kind of being. He's just kind of existing. He's just kind of trusting. And I like this because one of the things that I think about as I train for how do I be a Christian in a world that's full of noise and chaos and things that are loud and vying for my attention is that I always feel like I have to pick one. I always feel like I have to put out fires. I don't ever want to get in that spot. We put out things that are urgent, but not everything is urgent is important. Just because something is yelling at us doesn't mean we ought to do it. I mean, I sit and study at my desk, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, my phone is calling to me to do something on my phone, to scroll, to waste time. That is something vying for my attention. It is not important, nor is it urgent, but it is there. And it is clouding, it's creating chaos. So what is Paul doing? He's just being. He's just kind of existing, knowing that the world will go on. And not just because he feels so small and insignificant. I think it's rather the opposite, because he believes in a God that is so much bigger than anything else. These people are like, he's just got to be looking around like, man, you don't even realize how big God is. You ever had that thought? You interact with people in the world, you're just like, man, I wish you could have a bigger understanding of God. Because I wish that for myself. I think of what Paul wrote. I mean, this isn't that long ago. He wrote the letter to the Ephesian church. And in it, he's praying, I hope that you get the height, the depth, the length, and the width of the love of God. He's praying for them that I hope you understand that what you think of God is not big enough. That's Paul's prayer for the church. And what I'm praying is that the God that you think about is still smaller than the God who actually is. And then our minds are like kind of blown, like, whoa, and then we start thinking, maybe I'll think of God a little bit bigger. And still the reality is that prayer never, ever ceases to be true. The thoughts that we have of God are always smaller than the God is. They will always be smaller. That's amazing. I love that fact. That I serve a God that even I think He is great and He can get me out of situations, but I continue to know that He does more than I know He can do. He's more for me than I know he can do. His grace is bigger than I know he can do. His power is greater than I know he can do. I can't even think about how big to think about God actually is. I think that's got to give comfort to Paul, to be riding along, because how many chapters ago they're like, don't go to Jerusalem, Paul, you're going to be bound, you're going to be brought before these people, you might be dead. And Paul's like, don't tell me what not to do, because you are breaking my heart. I must do this. His motivation is true, his motivation is right, because he knows exactly who God is. He does not know the future, even though someone told him, but he goes headlong into it knowing because God is God and I am not. When I make decisions in life, do I just be and let God be? I have found that to be a great thing for my life when I pray. Because I try to settle in and I try to get settled and I try to focus my mind, and I can't, because my mind there's just things going on that are creating noise. It's almost like you ever seen those tops where you spin it and then you let it go, and all of a sudden like, okay, now I can stop, but it continues to spin and spin and spin and spin and spin until you actually stop it. That's the mind. We need to stop it. But how do we stop it? We say, oh, I'm trying to stop it with my own head. No, that doesn't work. You're trying to outthink yourself is exhausting. That's called anxiety. But when we trust and say, God, I am not in charge, but you are. I am not lifted up, but you are. I go to Psalm 131. That's my psalm. God, you are God. I'm not occupied with things beyond me, because you control those things. I see this measure of steadiness in Paul. Don't you guys see that? This measure of just no matter what's happening. All of a sudden he went from beating to being escorted to the Roman governor. He knows that Jesus told him he's going to go to Rome. But man, just continue. What's going to happen next? What's going to happen next? So, picking up in verse 24. Chapter 24, verse 1. And after 5 days, the high priest, Ananias, came down with some elders and spokesmen, one Tertullus. They laid before the governor their case against Paul. So 5 days. They hurried Paul out because he's obviously going to cause a little chaos, but Ananias has taken time, and we realize in these 5 days he is plotting. He is planning, because Tertullus is what they call a barrister, or basically what we would call a professional lawyer. He's hired someone specifically to bring a case against Paul before the governor, specifically with legal language. And when he had been summoned, Tertullus began to accuse him, saying, since through you we enjoy much peace, and since by your foresight, most excellent Felix, reforms are being made for this nation, in every way and everywhere we accept this with all gratitude. He is flattering, absolutely flattering for Felix. But this is also something that happened in Roman legal system. This was considered a standard introduction. But to detain you no further, I beg you in your kindness to hear us briefly. And I guess when I read this character, I can just feel his sliminess, so I'm just reading it into the text, okay? For we have found this man a plague, one who stirs up riots among all the Jews throughout the world, and is a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes. He's trying to assign Paul, he's trying to paint him in a pretty negative picture. He's a sect of this true Jewish religion because, again, Felix is the governor of Judea. He knows about the Jewish religion. He knows that there are sects of Judaism. That's normal. And so he's trying to paint Paul as a riotous, rebellious part of a sect that's causing problems. This is that person. He even tried to profane the temple, but we seized him, which is incorrect, by the way. Paul did not try to profane the temple. He went there to purify himself and to worship in the temple. More about that in a little bit. By examining him yourself, you will be able to find from him about everything of which we accuse him of. You, Felix, yourself, you examine him, and then you'll find out it's the exact same thing that we are saying. The Jews also joined in the charge, affirming that all of these things were so. So there's a group of people. There's this barrister who's doing all the right legal things and saying all the right words and doing all the flattery. And all the other people are like, yep, that's right. He's evil. That's the bad guy. And when the governor had nodded for him to speak, and And I think this is interesting. This is the first time Paul has spoken since we started. Paul has not said a word, which I think is really important. I think silence sometimes is our biggest weapon against the noise. But we forget about that because we're so used to the noise. We're so used to something that we need something, or else we feel a little bit uncomfortable. Well, I think that's part of it. The silence is uncomfortable, but we need to lean into that. What is this? There's these life hacks now, and they say the new life hack is the ability to be bored. Have you guys heard this? We are not able to be bored because we're not used to it. There's always something to distract us. So the ability to be bored is now a superpower, they're calling it, because we can actually just be. And people who can be bored and can just be and enjoy and actually participate in silence are people who are doing well because they're more able to be mentally stable, more clear. And I'll also add, spiritually as Christians, you can't hear God unless you stop talking. Which seems kind of a funny thing to say, but man, do I forget it often. I'm quick to pray, but I'm not quick to listen. This is the first time Paul speaks. Let God be your defender. Let God be his defense. And he says, knowing that for many years you have been a judge over this nation, I cheerfully make my defense. Paul's doing the same thing. He's not flattery. It is partially. This is a standard Roman legal introduction for legal defense. You can verify that it is not more than 12 days since I went up to Jerusalem and worship. And they did not find me disputing with anyone or stirring up a crowd, either in the temple or in the synagogues or in the city. Neither can they prove to you what they bring up now against me. This is what he's kind of pushing out here. He's saying they actually don't have any evidence. Because what Paul did was, he was in the temple, he was purified. And what that means is he had to go before the tank, the washing tank. He went under the water. There was a priest there who watched him go under the water. And he came up and he says, now you are clean by the name of priest, whatever his name is. There would be a record of people there who saw that Paul went through the standard things to do this, to be a part of the temple. He was not there inciting riots. He was not there yelling. He was not there trying to cause problems. There would be a legal, religious witness who says, no, Paul was there to be purified. He was there to participate in worship. Oh, they didn't think about that. They didn't think about all that thing. And also the fact is they went into the temple and took him out. They are actually the ones who defiled the temple. Okay, but this is where Paul, I think, really does an interesting thing. Verse 14. But this I confess to you, not typically something you hear in legal trials, that according to the way, you guys have that? You see that's capitalized in your Bible? The way. Anyone remember those old Bibles, those green Bibles from like the 70s and 80s that said the way on them? Yeah, that's from this verse, the way. Okay? It's capitalized because he's referring to the way that they follow Jesus as Jewish Christians. The way. It's a very specific thing. This is what people would know. Which they call a sect. I worship the God of our fathers, believing everything laid down by the law written in the prophets. Paul's not denying the Old Testament. He's not denying things that have happened. We believe what Jesus says, I have come not to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. There are people out there even today, I want you to be aware of this, today, that will try to say that the Old Testament isn't important, or that we should unhitch ourselves from that, or we shouldn't pay as much attention to that. Because really we believe I've heard this before, I'm a New Testament Christian. No, we are a Bible Christian. The Old Testament is the character of God. If you are saying that this is different, then we need to talk, because this is not. The character of God is full of grace and love and mercy, and if people are going to pick verses out, then I want to have a discussion. We are not New Testament Christians only, we are Bible Christians who believe in the fullness of God, the fulfillment and the completion of the law in Jesus, not the separation from it. So Paul is saying, this is the way that I practice. And he's going before Felix and saying all this. I have a hope, this is verse 15, in God, which these men themselves accept, that there will be a resurrection of both the just and the unjust. So I always take pains to have a clear conscience towards both God and man. And Paul goes on, Hey, Shelby, would you pull up that picture? The resurrection is an exceptionally important thing in Christianity. Okay? This is the Mount of Olives. And so the tower in the back is where it's generally where Jesus ascended into heaven. The resurrection is one of the most defining characteristics of Christianity in the ancient world. Now, the Pharisees believed that there was going to be a resurrection. As you see all of these things on all the mount, all of the rocks, those aren't rocks, those are tombs and graves. They have these little boxes, they're called bone boxes, they have a name for them, and they believe that this is going to be a resurrection. They wait for the resurrection of the Messiah to come. And Paul's saying, I know who the Messiah is. I believe in this resurrection. Can you just imagine for just a moment when Jesus comes back? And this is going to be just an saying. He's going to descend in the same way that he went up. He's going to descend coming down. And on this mountain, there's going to be tens of thousands of people resurrected from the dead. That's going to be an outstanding picture of the power of God. An outstanding picture of the power of God. And this is where Paul is making his claim. This is what I believe in the future resurrection. And the future resurrection is only possible because I believe in the current resurrection of Jesus. Everything in our gospel hinges on the moment that Jesus says, he said all the right things. But then if you stay dead, then what? So what? But he didn't. We're the only religion in all of history, in all of the world, whose God did not stay dead. That should say a lot. And yet people deny it. People say, oh, that didn't happen. It was a mystery. No, it's one of the most historically proven points through all the witnesses and all the accounts. If you do some research, there's an immense amount of things talking about there will be a resurrection of the dead. And Paul says, for the just and the unjust. I think this is kind of my final third point. We talked about how I trust in God who is beyond my comprehension. I lean into the silence knowing that I can just be that God is in control. But the third thing is that I know that my final destination, no matter anything in this life that happens, no matter any decision that goes on, there is nothing that can take away my faith in eternal residence in heaven with Jesus. Nothing. And I think Paul has to have that in the back of his mind. And I want to train myself to do that always. That I want to make wise decisions. I want what's best in this world. But I know that no matter the outcome will always end up in I get to be with Jesus in heaven forever. No matter what. It changes a few of my decisions. Not crazy decisions. I'm not going to buy a different brand of car because of it. But in my day-to-day life, it's like, I might be a little bit more relieved in my decisions. I might have a little bit less pressure on myself, knowing that the things I do because I'm looking forward to Him. That I am preparing myself day by day to gaze at Jesus, and I want to gaze at Him so much in this life that when I do get to heaven, there's as little as transition as possible, that I am as little as blown up as possible, but I know that's still going to be beyond my imagination. Continually look forward to heaven. It changes what we do in the meantime, because things seem a little bit less busy. If I think about the eternity of God, and my place in eternity with Him. Things seem a little bit less chaotic, a little bit less urgent, a little bit less noisy. Because I know that it's inevitable it's coming. And that it doesn't really pale in comparison to what's coming. So Paul goes on in 17, now after several years, I came to bring alms to my nation to offer gifts. He's continuing his defense. I went back to the temple. And while I was doing this, they found me purified in the temple, without a crowd or tumult. But some Jews from Asia, that would be his opponents who have followed him around for the last 3 years, they ought to be here before you and to make an accusation, should they have anything against me. They're the ones who have done this. They're the ones who should be against me. Or else let these men themselves say what wrongdoing they found when I stood before the council. Other than this one thing that I cried out while standing among them, it is with respect to the resurrection of the dead that I am on trial before you today. He lays himself out there before Felix. He lays himself out there for this people, for this professional barrister, this legal man, a master of the law. And Paul doesn't go to all the fancy things. He just says, I am here because I believe in the resurrection of Jesus. But Felix, and I think this is a fascinating twist, Felix having a rather accurate knowledge of the way. He knew not just about it. He's like, I've heard of this way, and I have good knowledge about this. He put him off. He put off the tribune, off the accuser, saying, when Lysias, the tribune, comes down, then I'll decide your case. And when the next guy who's in charge, the other guy who's in charge, when he comes down, he's putting him off because he sees this as a joke. This is ridiculous. I'm wasting my time with this. Then he gives orders to the centurion that he, Paul, should be kept in custody, but have liberty, that none of his friends should be prevented from attending to his needs. Paul is under basically kind of a house arrest, but really a house arrest with a lot of freedom. Considering he was just beaten, Felix, who is naturally against the Jewish religion, is like, what you guys are doing is kind of ridiculous. This guy is fine. Let's put him under house arrest, and he continues to put him off, and put him off, and put him off. This is a really good outcome for Paul. And after some days, Felix and his wife Drusilla, who was Jewish, had sent for Paul and heard him speak about faith in Jesus Christ. Now, isn't that a switch? The guy who was like, we're going to send him to Felix. Felix will tell him what to do. He'll cut his head off because this guy doesn't want any trouble in Jerusalem because he's sick of dealing with all the Jews and all these people and all the riots. He's going to take care of this guy right away. We just got to bring a good guy in. He'll take care of him right away. And what does Felix do? No, let's put him under house arrest. Let's keep him here. And what Felix is thinking, I think in the back of his mind, Jesus has worked in Felix's heart to be like, you know what? You should keep this guy around as your professional pastor of asking questions about who Jesus is. And that's what he does. For the next period of time, he brings Paul in consistently, him and his wife, saying, tell me about Jesus. Man, isn't that a switch? Isn't that unexpected? That's something you talk about, things I never saw that this year would happen, where the governor who was going to kill me is now saying, tell me about Jesus. And we doubt the power of his work, the Spirit's convictional nature in people's hearts. And so Paul reasoned about righteousness and self-control and the coming judgment. He reasoned about it, saying, hey, how are you righteous? Questions like, hey, when you get to heaven, how do you know that you're going to be good enough to enter? Because that's the common belief, isn't it? When I get there, there's going to be the giant scale, and I want to know if I've done enough good things to outweigh the bad things. Paul's like, how do you know? And if you really find people like that, you really want to give them mess them a little bit, ask them, what happens if the scales are equal? There is no answer. Because that whole way of thinking about judgment is wrong. There is no amount of good things that can compensate for offending and treason against the God, creator of the universe. And Paul's laying it out there. What are you going to do with this? How are you going to deal with the righteous? How are you missing this? Because Paul will say, because I know someone who offers righteousness freely for those who believe in him. I know someone who will take care of your sin and give you his righteousness, his good standing, so that when we stand before God in the final judgment, he'll say, I see Jesus in you. And it's not because of our work, but it's because of his work. He reasoned about self-control. That is the number one virtue in the Greek world, is self-control. And Christians have an immense amount of it for those who practice, those who continue to strive after it, day after day. And the coming judgment goes back to this again and again. You guys had those moments? I remember I had a moment once when someone talked to me and goes, hey, if you were to die right now, how confident are you that you would go to heaven? It's a powerful question. And you get it from a certain people, and if you get it from other kinds of people, you get really offended because they're acting in a weird way. But certain people ask that really good question, and you're just like, I need to wrestle with that. Or, as Christians, we can have full confidence saying, I do know. Because Jesus offers full confidence for those who believe in him. No doubt. He's having real conversations with Felix and Drusilla, which is ironic because Felix and Drusilla are in the line of Herod Agrippa, who only a few chapters ago was literally tormenting and killing churches. And here his daughter and son-in-law are asking, tell me more about this man. And so Felix was alarmed and said, go away for the present time. When I get an opportunity, I will summon you. Yeah, I bet you he had his world rocked a little bit in that moment. At the same time, he hoped that money would be given to him by Paul, so he sent him for him often and conversed with him. So he loved the conversation with Paul. He loved talking to him, but he also was hoping, hey, would you bribe me? Because if you bribed me, I would let you go. What an interesting debate. If you would just give me a little bit of money, man, I'll let you go. But at the same time, I'm really glad that you're here so I can talk with you about things of life. But when 2 years had elapsed, again, we're going to go fast at the time, Felix was succeeded by Porcius Festus, and desiring to do the Jews a favor, Felix left Paul in prison. So Paul remains in prison in Caesarea. Paul's life has been a little bit of noise, I think, and chaos, and you don't necessarily know where you're going to end up. And sometimes I feel like that day to day. I wake up and say, well, I know what I have to do today, but the noise is telling me all sorts of things that I ought to do or that I need to do, and it's exhausting sometimes even to wake up. You know? So how do I clear out the noise? How do I make decisions that help me practice not what is just urgent and in my face, but things that are absolutely important for my life? Well, I make decisions knowing that God is bigger than I know He is. He has more power and more say and more input into my life than I realize He does. And when moments are quiet, I want to seek the quiet. I want to seek the silence, because in the silence is when God speaks to me. When God tells me and reassures me, and the life, and then the noise of the world fades away when the silence of God comes in. And it's an impressive silence. It's a weighty silence. It's this moment of moving in closer to Him. We call it abiding. We continually talk this abiding relationship where you are just being with God. And we reside, lastly, in our confidence that no matter what in this world happens, I will end up in heaven knowing that I know Jesus. So we will continue on with our journey. In the next couple weeks, Paul's now going to be before Festus. But we don't have a closing song today, but I'd like to leave you with this, that have a fantastic week. That I would love to hear from you if you have questions, that I pray for you guys, that I think of you often, and I am so glad to be doing this with you guys as a church. Have a great week. We'll see you guys later.